bakers and bakerettes, welcome back to my space. If you're new to the channel, I'm Cassie, the mastermind behind all the epic bakes, cooks, preps, no bakes. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Thanks for joining me and allowing me to bake your day my way. Today I'm going to bake, it's an Italian bread. It's called Focaccia bread. And this is a no-knead bread. This bread is, it can serve as like flat thin with crispy edges. It can be thick and pillowy, which is the one that I'm going to bake. You can bake it in a square pan, a rectangular pan, whatever type, a round pan, whatever pan that you would like. You can use this bread as a sandwich bread. You can use it like as a side dish. You can also use it if you want to make individual pizzas that are like pillowy. It's very, very moist, very tender, has a very nice crisp crust around it. It's a really good bread. It's one of my favorites. Now, the main ingredients for this bread, of course, are going to be high protein ingredients. You're going to have your bread flour. We're going to use lots of olive oil because this bread is a no knead, so it loves olive oil because you have to do some stretch and folds. 2 teaspoons of salt. Of course, you know I oppose salt, but I will place it in this bread. And of course, you need 2 tablespoons of 2 teaspoons of yeast. 2 teaspoons of yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt, 4 cups of high protein flour. But if you have all-purpose flour, you can use it. You're gonna need 1 tablespoon of the olive oil in the dough. And then once you get ready to put it in the pan, you have to use 3 tablespoons of olive oil to grease your pan. Even if you use parchment paper, or if you have a non-stick pan, you're still gonna have to use 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Then when you do the stretch and fold, once you transfer it to the baking pan, you have to use olive oil on top, and then you have to let it rise, and then you place olive oil on it again, and you're gonna place some toppings on it, whatever toppings you desire, and you have to olive oil those as well because they will, of course, burn. You can use olives, you can use rosemary, basil, cilantro. You can buy the salad spread, whatever it is that you would like to top yours with, but just make sure whatever it is that you do, use the olive oil to oil it, or it will burn on the top. I'm going to use my famous garlic and herb seasoning. I do have some rosemary and I do have some olives, but I want to try this out and see how this works because I've used those before. But again, I would have to make sure that these have oil on them when I place it on the top. We're also going to create some dimples. We're going to dimple and shake it because I told you in the leavening products video that when you bake the cakes, you want to remove the air bubbles because you don't want separation. You don't want the air pockets in your cakes because you want every slice to be smooth. But with the Italian bread, you want the bubbles, which is what we're going to form here when we do the stretch and flips. Because when we do the stretch and flips, we're going to actually create the gluten, which is going to give us the characteristics of the bubbles that we want. And no, you can't pop the bubbles because the bubbles are necessary for this bread. It is the characteristics of the bread. All right. So with that being said, and my oven tells me that it has now reached the temperature that we're going to bake at, which is 400 degrees Fahrenheit, for roughly about 20 to 22 minutes. Let's get started with the bake. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 2 cups of warm, not hot water, but warm water. Okay. And to the warm water, you're going to add 2 teaspoons of your salt. Then you're going to add 1 tablespoon of your extra virgin olive oil, or if you just have the regular olive oil, that's fine. Remember with olive oil, when you start talking about extra virgin, of course, you know it's going to add a taste to it. So if you don't like the taste of olive oil, don't use the extra virgin. The next you're going to add is going to be your yeast. And each packet of yeast is roughly about 2 1/4 teaspoons. And here you need the 2. Okay, so that's 1. And that's 2. And it's only like a little drop left in the pack, so it's not going to make a difference. I'm just going to add it in. Now to this, you're going to need 4 cups of your bread flour. Now before I add the bread flour, what I like to do is basically whisk this all together. And I like to let this sit for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to place you on a brief pause while this sits, and then I'll be ready to measure out my flour and add it. Okay, I've let it sit for 5 minutes, and the purpose for that is because I added 2 teaspoons of salt, and you want to make sure that the salt actually dissolves in the water. And of course, the ratio of salt to water here is not an equivalence, and of course it's more of the liquid than the salt, but you did add olive oil to it, which is water's polar and the oil the non-polar. Of course they're not going to mix, so you want to make sure that the salt does dissolve in your water. So I usually whisk it and I let it sit for about 5 minutes, and then I whisk it again. Right now I've already measured out my 4 cups of bread flour. I'm using bread flour. You can also use all-purpose, whatever flour you have on hand will work. The purpose of your flour, this is where of course you're going to get your gluten formation when you're doing the stretch and flips. And the higher the protein content of your flour, the larger or the bigger the bubbles you're going to have. And of course your bread is going to rise, and it's going to be like very fluffy, very pillowy. Because I said with the focaccia or focaccia, however you pronounce it, the characteristic of it is the fact that it does form the bubbles. That is from the gluten, right? So remember to use at least a flour that has at least 12 grams or 12% of protein. That depends. That determines whether your bread is thin or if it's going to be thick and like pillowy, fluffy. So now we're going to add our flour to it. 4 cups. You always have some that wants to hang around the top. Okay. And then we're going to also whisk this in. And as I said, this is a high hydration dough, meaning that you have the gluten formation. You do not need to knead this. You just whisk it. And make sure that everything becomes all incorporated together. Right? I'm going to grab my spatula. You're gonna, whatever you use from this point on, you want to make sure that you wet it in some cold water. Because that way the dough won't adhere to it. I'm just going to take this off the whisk. As you can see, it comes off very easily. Okay. Right. So you want to scrape down the sides of the bowl and take your spatula and just fold it over and make sure that everything is mixed in well. Right. Right. As you can see, this is a high hydration. Okay, as you can tell. It seems to be like sticky. You can't knead it. No way, no how. All right. So now what you want to do is you're going to take your lid and you're going to place the lid on the bowl. Again, scrape down the sides and make sure everything is in the bowl. And you're going to place the lid on it and you're going to let it sit out at room temperature for 30 minutes. Now, one thing about this bread is that it takes about 2 hours to get it to where it's ready to either sit it in the refrigerator overnight, which is what I do and I recommend, or you can let it sit out for about an hour covered, and then you can bake it immediately if you would like. I like to do it where it's an overnight process. So this isn't a bread that I like to do and then pop it in the oven and then use it, because I do like the high, the fluffy, pillowy, kind of thicker bread, because I like to use this to make sandwiches. And one thing about using this bread to make a sandwich is that you don't have to use any of the condiments. You don't have to use ketchup, mustard, mayo, any of those, because it's so moist and it's so pillowy, to when you put your meat or your cheeses or whatever type of sandwich you want to use, ham, turkey, chicken, whatever it is, it's not going to be a dry sandwich using this bread. So now you would like to place the lid on it. Or if you don't have a lidded container, you can just wrap some saran wrap across the top. Allow it to sit out. Now we have to let this sit for 30 minutes. Then we're going to come back and do some stretch and folds, because again, you don't need it. We'll let it sit 30 minutes. And we're going to do 4 series of letting it sit for 30 minutes and do the stretch and folds. Now, what that does is that's when your gluten forms, and that's when you start getting your bubbles. Like with the cakes and stuff, when we turn our oven on and we have our leavening ingredients in, once the whether it's a cold oven or a hot oven, when the temperature is where it needs to be, that's when you're going to get the gluten formation in the cakes. That's when the leavening process starts taking place. Here it's in the stretch and folds. Okay, so we'll let it sit for 30 minutes, and then I'll pick you back up. We'll do the 4 series of stretch and folds over the 30-minute increments, which is 2 hours. And listen to your dough, because your dough is going to tell you whether it's ready or not. That's with any breads or any dough, any cakes, anything. The dough is going to tell you when it's ready, right? So I'll place you on a brief pause, and then I'll pick you back up, and we'll do our first series of stretch and folds. Hello, everyone. I'm back, and we're ready for the first series of stretch and folds. All right. So what you want to do is, and I did wash my hands, you want to make sure that you have some cold water, and you want to just put your hand in the cold water, and this is to make sure that the dough does not stick to your hand, just like you would do if you had a spatula or so in this one you're going to stretch and fold, quarter turn, stretch and fold, quarter turn, stretch and fold, and then you'll do another quarter turn, and you're going to stretch and you're going to fold. Okay, now with that being said, it still kind of sticks just a little, but not too much. All right, so now we're going to place the lid back on it, and we're going to let this sit for another 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do another series of stretch and fold, and we're going to do that 4 times. And you listen to your dough, because your dough is going to let you know when it's ready. Pay very close attention. You want a smooth dough. It's gonna when you pull it around the fourth time, it'll seem like it's going to resist when you do your stretch and folds. And that tells you that the dough is ready, right? Then you'll start seeing the formation of the bubbles, right? Which is the gluten. The bubbles is the characteristics, right? So 30 minutes, and then we'll come back. This is a 2-hour process, but you really and truly is 5 minutes worth of work once you get everything mixed, because you're only stretching and folding. So 30 minutes you can go wash dishes or do something different. Come back to it, stretch and fold, place the lid back on it, come back 30 minutes later, stretch and fold, right? So I'll put you on another brief pause, and we'll be back for our second series. Hello everyone, back for the second series of stretch and folds. It only the longest thing is waiting the 30 minutes, because this is again a no knead dough, a high hydration. So basically we're just stretching and folding to get those unique bubbles. So you want to stretch it and fold it. And if you wet it every time, you don't have to wet your hands every time, you don't have to worry about it sticking. Then you're going to stretch and fold. And as you can see, the texture is somewhat changing because it was very loose and runny. Now it's starting to get a little smoother. As I said earlier, listen to your dough, because your dough is going to tell you when it's ready. And that's with any bread. Okay, so that's the second series. You'll place the cover back on, and we will let it sit for 30 minutes, and we'll come back and we'll do our third series. So hang tight. Okay guys, we're back for our third stretch and fold. Again, make sure you wet your hand so that the dough doesn't stick. And as you can see, it has changed its texture. It was like running. Now it's very fluffy, very pillowy. So make sure you, and I do wash my hands before I come. And make sure that you wet your hands, and you're gonna again stretch and fold, quarter turn, wet your hands, stretch and fold, quarter turn, make sure you wet your hands, stretch and fold, quarter turn, wet your hand. Again, you're going to stretch and fold, okay? And this is the third one. Again, you can see that it definitely is getting smoother, fluffier. So now we'll place the lid on it again. And that was the third stretch and fold. And we'll wait 30 minutes, and we'll come back for our fourth stretch and fold. So hang with me. Hello, I'm back. See how it's rose? You see the air bubbles? Let's get a little closer. Turn on this light, and you can see how fluffy and jiggly. And you can see the bubbles, but don't poke the bubbles. All right. You can actually see the bubbles forming like on the side. Right? So now we're gonna do the same series. We're going to wet our hands with some cold water, and you're going to stretch and fold. Okay? So you're gonna stretch and fold. And as I stretch, I want you to see the consistency has changed tremendously. Okay? It seems like it wants to snap back. Right? Quarter turn, and you're gonna stretch, and this time you're picking the whole dough up, as you can see. So again, listen to your dough, because your dough, when you bake any bread, it's gonna tell you. And as you pull it the fourth time, you're gonna see more of the air bubbles, which you can actually see a big one that's formed right there, which is characteristic of this bread, right? Which is not actually a bread. We call it a bread. They say if bread and pizza had a baby, it would be the Focaccia, if I say it right, Focaccia, Focaccia. Some people say Focaccia, but this is an Italian bread. So, and the characteristics are the large or big bubbles that it formed. So this was the fourth time. So I'm going to place the lid on it, and at this point I'm going to place it in the refrigerator. Now if you didn't get the stretch back and you didn't see the bubbles forming, then you would do a fifth, wet your hand, stretch and fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold. I have my bubbles and I've gotten the resistance. So now I'm going to place the lid on it, and I'm going to place my dough in the refrigerator, and I'm going to place it in there for overnight. And then I will take it out and I'll pick you back up tomorrow when it's time to do the last part before the bake. All right. So with this bread, as I said, it's considered to be a flatbread, but it's not really a flatbread, because the flatbread is determined by the type of, or the consistency of the bread is determined by the type of flour you use. I'm using a very fine flour, so of course my bread is going to be about 1 inch thick. It's going to be very fluffy, very pillowy, very moist. It's going to give that nice spring back, and I like it because it makes very good sandwiches for me. I'm not really one for buying bread. As I said when I made bread before, I kind of like to make my own. This is definitely one that is a go-to for sandwiches, and it's one that you don't really have to use any of the condiments for, and you still have a very moist sandwich. Now if you use a even though they're both going to be about 12% protein, if you use a flour that's coarse, then you're going to get a thinner bread, and it's going to be a little darker, more like pizza crust. And that's why I say you can use this as a sandwich bread, you can use it as a side dish, or you can use it to actually make a pizza crust or to make individual pizzas. It depends on the texture of the flour that's actually used. And they call it leavened or flatbread, but it's technically not. The variety of flours that are out there, if you use an all-purpose flour, which usually has about 4 grams of protein, you still get the air bubbles. They won't be as intense or as large. Whereas some of the flours are very thin, like farina is like one that's very fine. And then you can find those that are just a little bit coarser. I used the bread flour this time. That is for baking, when you're baking breads using yeast. So of course the consistency here is going to be that of the thick, about a 1 inch thick bread. So that's why they say if pizza and bread, or if bread and pizza had a baby, it would be the focaccia. Okay, so I'm going to place this in the refrigerator. And I do prefer the overnight method of refrigerating it, because you get a very nice, it's a very tasty bread. Now as far as the toppings, I'm going to use my Flavor Mate garlic herb seasoning. This is a salt-free blend that has garlic and a lot of the different herbs, which I've shared with you guys before. This one has garlic, onion, black pepper, basil, rosemary, fennel, marjoram, savory, and celery seeds, and also carrot. So I'm going to make sure that I use my olive oil on the top and make it very oily, and then I'm going to add my seasoning, and then I'll add some more of the olive oil. This bread loves olive oil, even for the baking dish. I'm going to use a 9x13 baking dish, and I need to put 3 tablespoons of olive oil in this dish and make sure that I evenly distribute it throughout the pan. If you use a non-stick pan, you need to make sure that you use some parchment paper, and you still have to use 3 tablespoons of the olive oil, because this is a no-knead, very high hydration bread, and it will stick. It will stick to the bowl, pan, whatever you're cooking in. So even if you use parchment paper, you still need to use your 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Okay, and also whatever you decide, if you want to use olives and you want to use fresh rosemary, then you make sure that you take the olive oil and you toss your rosemary and your olives in the oil. Whatever topping you decide to put on, you need to make sure that you oil it, because if you do not, it is going to burn. Okay, you can use a variety of different things. If you want to put Parmesan cheese on the top, once you put your last olive oil and you want to sprinkle cheese on it once it comes out of the oven, you can do that as well. You can do a lot of different toppings, you know, whatever suits your fancy. You can do like sun-dried tomatoes, you name it. The list is endless. I kind of like this seasoning. I usually do just rosemary, but I like the garlic and herb seasoning on the bread because, like I said, I'm going to do sandwiches. And so then whatever I put on, it's going to have a nice taste to it. And also with the type of flour that you use, if you use a finer one, you'll have a the bread have a very nice taste. Whereas, of course, you know, with leaven, really flat bread, when you use the coarser flour, it's not going to be as tasty. I mean, it still have a nice taste to it, but it's not like the very fine flours and the 1 inch thick, because the 1 inch thick gives you all 1 inch thick gives you all of those air bubbles. You can see little pockets in there, and it rises, and it's so pillowy. That's my term that I use for it. Fluffy, and as you can see, the texture of the dough from one stretch and fold to the second stretch and fold to the third, you can start to see how the consistency of your dough changes. It goes from being very loose and runny to more consistent each time you do the stretch and folds. And in the last stretch and fold, you can see the resistance, because you can almost pull the whole thing out of the bowl when you try to fold it over on itself. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to place you on a pause. And of course, it'll seem like 5 minutes or 5 seconds to you. But of course, like I said, I place it in the refrigerator, and it's going to be there overnight. And then I will pick you back up when it's time to do another stretch and fold. Allow it to come to room temperature, oil my pan, transfer it to the pan, allow it to rise in the pan for 1 hour, and then we'll be ready to bake. Be blessed and hang tight. Hello everyone, welcome back. It is time. So I did leave the bread in the refrigerator overnight, and so now it is time to remove it. Okay. My disclosure is, if you leave it in the refrigerator overnight, especially for beginning bakers, that is the best choice. However, as I said, when I started the prep, you can cover it for 30 minutes to an hour, maybe even 2 hours, and then you can bake it the same day, right? Alrighty, so now what we have to do is we have to, this is cold dough, as you know. So we're gonna have to allow it to come to room temperature. That's what it looks like. So I'm going to let it sit for 2 hours, okay? And then I'm going to add olive oil to it, and I'm going to do a stretch and fold. Then I'm going to transfer it to the baking pan, which is going to consist of 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And then we're going to cover it, and then we'll be ready to bake. Or you can just go ahead and add some olive oil to it, tuck and fold, and then you can place it in the baking tray and let it sit for your 2 hours and let it rise in the pan, and then you can place it in the oven. So there are options. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my 3 tablespoons of olive oil in the baking tray. And remember that if you are not using a non-stick pan, you need to use parchment paper. And if you use a parchment paper, then you still have to use the 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And you want to make sure that you place the olive oil evenly distributed throughout the pan very well, coating the sides, the corners, the bottom, really, really well. This dough loves olive oil, as you can see. All right. So then you just drizzle a little bit of olive oil on top of the dough. I would say about a tablespoon will be good enough. Okay. And then again, you want to make sure you have some cold water on hand. And as you know, oil and water don't mix, so you're not going to have any issues here. And again, you will do the same thing. You will, and as you will stretch it, and as you can see, the consistency has definitely changed from yesterday. And you're going to fold it. You'll wet your hands. You're going to stretch and fold. And you can hear the air. You're going to stretch and fold. And you see all the beautiful bubbles. Wet your hands. And you're going to stretch. And now you can see that it definitely pulls back. Right? And fold. All right? So now I'm just going to take it from the bowl that was in the refrigerator in. I'm going to transfer it to my baking 9x13 baking pan, right, that I've already coated. I'm going to place a little more olive oil on it, not a lot, and just pat it. And don't bust the bubbles. Remember, do not bust the bubbles. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to cover this pan, and I'm going to let it sit in the pan that I'm going to bake it in, because of course it is cold dough and it has to rise. As I said, I gave you two options. You can leave it in the pan as you had it in and let it rise and transfer it, or you can go ahead and transfer it. Either or, it's going to work. Okay? So now I'm going to get the saran wrap. Down here somewhere. Here it is. Okay, I'm going to get the saran wrap. And I'm going to pull off a piece. Be mindful of my time here. And some people leave theirs out for like an hour and then they're ready to bake it. I usually leave mine out for 2 hours and I get really good results, because I want to make sure that it rises in the pan that I'm going to bake it in, and also I want to make sure it's at room temperature. I'm not in any rush. Okay. All right, they'll be ready in time for me to make my sandwiches. All right, so I'm going to let this, I'm covering it with the saran wrap, really good. I'm going to let it sit out in the pan I'm going to bake it in, and go ahead and come to room temperature in the baking pan, rise in the baking pan. And then we're going to do the Dimple and Shake, where you make the molds in it. It's like you just take your fingers with some cold water, and we call them dimples, right? And that's another characteristic of this bread. And then we're going to be ready to bake it, all right? All right, so I'm going to place you on a brief pause while this comes to room temperature. And then we're going to get ready to dimple and shake and bake. All right? Hang tight. Okay, everyone. I have waited the 2 hours for the dough to come to room temperature and also to rise in the 9x13 baking dish that I'm going to bake it in. Right? And I've already added my olive oil to the dough. So this is what it looks like. It rises to meet the size of your dish. And remember, you can bake these square, you can bake them round, you can bake it rectangle, however you would like to bake it. I just find it better to transfer the cold dough to your baking dish and go ahead and put your olive oil so everything comes up to room temperature and the dough rises. And then you don't have to keep going back and forth. You're ready. Once you do your dimple and shake, you're ready to place it in the oven. So now comes the fun part. Remember I told you this bread, you have to have patience when preparing it, especially if you let it sit overnight in the refrigerator. It doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes a lot of time because it's a lot of waiting, okay? So here what you want to do is you want to make sure you have some cold water. Right? And then you're just gonna wet your hands with the cold water, and you're gonna you're not gonna bust the bubbles. You're just going to put like dimples in it. So you just stick your hand in the dough and just make the dimples, and you transfer it to the water. As you can see, the bubbles are like coming to the top, which, as I said when I initially started it, that's a characteristic of this bread, the focaccia. Right. So you just put the dimples in, which is just like poking your fingers in it, and a lot of people like it. This is the fun part for most. Okay. So then, because this, as we said, this gluten causes the large bubbles to form. Okay, and you want that. As you can tell, this is going to be about a 1 inch thick bread. Right. So now what I'm going to do, that I have all the dimples in, then you take it and you shake it. It moves just like jelly, like jello. You just take it and just shake it. And this part, what you're basically doing is making sure that it is evenly distributed in the baking pan. All right? Yeah. Okay. So poke it, just stick your fingers in it. They call it making dimples. Then go back the second time, poke and shake, poke and shake, poke and shake. Okay? All right. And it doesn't matter how hard you do it. Not really an art to it. It is what it is, right? All right. So now the hard part is over. All of the waiting, and now you're ready to bake your bread. Right? So you want to make sure that you have your oven on 400, and I'm going to do this on air fry for even distribution. So make sure it's on 400 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And you're going to bake it for roughly about 20 to 22 minutes. Now, as you know, when you're baking, everybody's oven temperatures vary. Whether you're using an older model oven, if you have a new model, whether it's the flat surface, the temperatures are going to vary. So I would say anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes would be in a normal range. After 20 minutes, I suggest you check your bread, make sure that it's either done or it needs a little longer time. And if it needs to bake longer, bake it in 5-minute increments, and then check it every 5 minutes. Because in some people's oven, it may take 30 minutes. Some people may take 35. Others may take 40 to 45. Somebody's oven may take an hour. It just depends. So I'm ready to place it in the oven. And as I said, I'm going to do this one on air fry mode. You can do it on just regular bake, and it should come out the same. It's no biggie. I'm just doing it for even distribution of heat. Right. So now, I didn't forget. Don't let me forget. The toppings. So whatever topping you would like, you can bake it just like it is. That's fine. If you would like to add any of your herbs, if you want to add olives, rosemary, if you want to add thyme or thyme, as they say, basil, whatever you want to, cilantro, whatever you want to add, you can add it to the top. I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of the olive oil, because see, I'm going to be using my garlic and herb seasoning. So I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of the olive oil on top, because you have to roll your, whatever it is you're going to put on it, you have to make sure that it is in your olive oil. You need to make sure that you coat the olives, the rosemary, because this is going to be fresh rosemary, or cilantro, basil, the leaves. Make sure that you roll it in olive oil, because you don't want the additives or the garnishments to burn. Right. So I'm just gonna cover the top with my famous or favorite garlic and herb seasoning. And you can use sun-dried tomatoes, whatever you want to use as your topping or your garnishment, you may use that. Um, and always keep in mind the purpose for making the bread. Like for me, I'm going to use this for sandwiches, so this will be a really good seasoning. You can also buy the salad spread. That will be a really good seasoning to put on top. Um, of course, you know, if you were doing like the pizzas, it would be good to do like the tomato, sun-dried tomatoes will be a really good choice. And I'll just push it in. And again, I do the poke and shake. Um, no biggie. And this is just making sure that I do get some of my seasoning incorporated in the dough. And also, it makes sure that the seasoning is moist. It's coated with the olive oil. Okay. Alrighty. So now we are ready for the bake. So I'm just going to take it and I'm going to place it in the oven, of course, on my bottom rack, and I'm going to place it in the center of the oven. And then I'm going to leave it to bake. So I will place you on a brief pause. Again, the bake time is usually 20 to 22 minutes. But it could vary by oven. It could take 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, an hour, who knows. But you have to check it after the 20 minutes to determine if it is done or if it needs to bake longer. And of course, you use a toothpick, a kebab stick, a fork. You just poke it in, pull it out, make sure it comes out clean, as you do with all bakes. Okay? So I'm going to place you guys on a brief pause while the bread is baking. And when it's ready to be removed from the oven, I will pick you guys back up. So hang tight. Okay, everyone. It's time to remove the bread from the oven. And as you can see, you have a nice golden brown top, and also the sides are going to be nice and golden brown. So now what you have to do is you remove it from the baking pan and place it on a rack and let it cool, or you can leave it in the pan that it's in. It's up to you. If you use the parchment paper in the pan, you can just pick the parchment paper up, remove it from the sides, and just allow it to cool for about 10 minutes, and then it's ready to serve. Now, one thing that I didn't tell you about baking it in the oven is that it is required that you use a ventilated oven. Make sure that your vent is on while the bread is baking. But if you don't have a ventilated oven, it still will work. All right. So it gives you a nice, and I did do my clearance test to make sure that it was done. You just do the poke, and if it comes out clean, and of course you know that it's done. Okay. And it gives you it's like a hard crust on the outside of it, but once it cools and once you cut it, as you can see, it's going to spring back. It's very, 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 very moist. We say that it's very pillowy, very fluffy. All right. So I'm just going to allow it to cool, and then once it cools, I will bring you back. And I'm not sure if I want to cut it today or not, because I'm not going to make the sandwich right now. I may wait until I'm ready, and then I'll just cut it, take a picture, and post it on the community page so you can actually see what it looks like on the inside. But if you look at it, I'll hold it up right quick. And if you can see where it has the crack in it, you can kind of see how fluffy and how moist it is. But I may cut it just so you can see what a slice looks like. I may cut just a piece out the end. All right. All right, so I'm going to place you on a brief pause while it cools, and then I will pick you back up when it's time to slice and dice. Okay, everyone, the bread is ready. It is cooled. I have sliced it, and this is what it looks like. As you can see, it's about a 1 inch thickness. As you can see, I told you with the air pockets, if you bake a cake and you don't remove the air bubbles, this is what you're gonna get. But when you bake this bread, of course, this is what you want. The bubbles that are formed when the gluten is formed, and that gives the bread its characteristics. And as you can see, if you press down, it just bounces back. It is very fluffy, very pillowy, as we say. You can even pick it up and like press down and it springs back. Very, very pillowy. Makes a very good sandwich bread, right? So you can slice it any way you would like. You can slice it the long way. You can cut it in fours and then slice it down the middle, right down the middle, and open it up and make a sandwich out of it. And remember, I told you that the consistency or the texture of the flour that you use determines whether you have your 1 inch thick bread, or if you get the more of the flat bread, which is what it's known as. If you use the very fine flour, you'll get a very thick, pillowy 1 inch bread. If you use the coarse flour, you're gonna get the thinner, more like the flatbread texture, and it'll be darker. It won't be as white as this bread, right? Because I used the bread flour, and it was high protein, and it is very fine. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Again, you have your beautiful golden brown, and also on the sides and the bottom. And when you slice it on the inside, as you can see, it's very, very pillowy, very thick, very moist. Makes a very good sandwich bread. I also, whatever topping that you put on it as garnishment for it, you can also prepare that in some olive oil and use it as a dipping sauce and serve this bread as a side dish. I can also use it and put some Parmesan cheese on top, and I can like put it back in the oven and just let the cheese kind of melt just a little, and I can serve this in, with spaghetti, or you can serve it as a side dish with anything. Just make sure that whatever you garnish it with complements the dish that you're actually preparing. Right? So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for coming along with this bake with me. I greatly appreciate you if you're a subscriber. If you just strolled by and something caught your attention, I hope that you will consider subscribing, and we welcome you. If you have not clicked the thumbs up, that's the like button. Please click the thumbs up. That just gives the YouTube world the notification that it is a video that's worth watching, and it's pushed out into the algorithm so that others can see what you see. If you haven't left a comment, please consider leaving a comment. Let me know your thoughts. If you've baked one of my dishes or you've modified it in any way, if it turned out good for you or if it didn't, share it with us and let me know what your thoughts are. We always welcome the positive comments. Please do not leave any negative comments. The world is full of negativity as it is. On my channel, I spread positive vibes. I encourage my subscribers, non-subscribers, just people who stroll by occasionally to check out the site, to leave positive vibes. We don't know what people go through from day to day, and your positivity could be the only positivity that they actually see. So let's keep this chain going. Encourage someone, enlighten someone, encourage yourself, enlighten yourself, motivate someone else. You know, be that positivity that we don't see in this world today, right? So as always, you know, keep God first, be a positive light for others, a positive light for yourself, encourage, enlighten, motivate, inspire others, treat people the way that you would like to be treated. That's the moral of the story. Until I see you again for the next bake, no bake, cook, prep, who knows. You guys take care and be blessed. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.